Hello, everybody. My name is Kate O'Connor, and I am the Executive Director of the Brattleboro Area Chamber of Commerce, and I am happy to serve as the moderator today for this panel. I want to thank the panelists for being here, everyone in the audience for being here, and of course, anyone who is watching this on BCTV. We appreciate that you are tuning in. We've got a great panel here today to talk about the state of the news media in Brattleboro and in Vermont. I'm going to pose the first question, but we really want to try to have this be a conversation between the panelists and anyone in the public who wants to ask a question. So after we do the introductions, we will open it to the floor. We've got 1 hour and a big topic, so I want to get right to it. I'd like to have the panel introduce themselves. And to start the conversation, I'd love to hear from each of you your thoughts on the following question. In this time of Trump and fake news, have you seen a change in the way consumers view your news organization, and have you had to change the way you cover the news? And we'll start with Kevin O'Connor from Vermont Digger.
Who happens to be the brother of the moderator. I am Kevin O'Connor. I'm with Vermont Digger, and I live and work in Brattleboro. I think what's interesting is Vermont Digger is about 10 years old, and we just were a news organization, but we didn't actually advertise that. And then suddenly, because of the election of the current president and a lot of the claims of fake news, suddenly we found ourselves in terms of how customers view us. They actually view us as a news organization now. I mean, it's interesting that what used to just be, suddenly now people are starting to recognize, oh, you cover the news. We have a motto now called News in Pursuit of Truth, in effect, just because I think people are looking for, the facts. So I think we haven't changed. I think it's just interesting how perspective of what we are has changed, that I do think people are looking for facts. And I think as a result of that, in terms of our case, but I'm assuming a lot of people on the panel's case, is you then sort of, in effect, promote yourself as someone who provides them.
Hi, I'm Marty Cohn, and I'm wearing the BCTV board member hat today. In my other life, I'm a public relations practitioner of a couple of years. BCTV is not a news organization, so we have not changed the way we cover the news. However, one thing that we have discovered this year is that the fact that we provide coverage of all the meetings that we cover, from select board meetings, planning meetings, town meetings, we're seeing more and more people appreciate the fact that government is now open to anyone to see what's going on. And I think that under threat of our funding from the FCC, we went to all the towns in which we cover their meetings, and we were very pleased to learn of the support that we get from all the towns because of the coverage, because we're able to provide the openness of government and provide what's going on. So while November 2016 did not change anything we did, what we're seeing is the support for what we do has definitely been demonstrated, especially in this time of financial uncertainty.
I'm Howard Weiss-Tisman. I work for Vermont Public Radio. I cover southern Vermont, Windham and Bennington counties. I live in Westminster. This question makes me think about what we hear from people sometimes when we talk to them, is that people are very weary of what's going on out there. And for a lot of people, public radio is their window into what's happening nationally and the world. So the impeachment hearings right now are being broadcast live. Anytime there's any kind of a national, international incident, a lot of people access it through public radio, and we hear that a lot of people are very weary of so much news coming at them, so much negative, troubling stuff, more than in the past, it seems. And so it might have changed our coverage a little bit, in the fact is that we're hearing a lot from, the news department is hearing from the people above us that again, that people are weary, so we're trying to, not write fluff, but try to write some positive news. People say that they're interested in solutions as much as hearing about the problem. And so along with reporting the news and telling people what's happening, we're trying to focus a little bit more on people who are working towards solutions and trying to figure out what's beyond all of this. So.
I'm Randy Holhut from the Commons, Windham County's independent source of news and views. You hear that a lot every Wednesday morning on WTSA, but I've been with the Commons for almost 10 years and did 2 tours at the Reformer before and after the sale to Media News, and have been in journalism around New England for nearly 40 years. So I'm the old timer, except for the older timer next to me. But has Trump changed us? No, we were here before Trump. We'll be here after Trump. And what's changed is the things we cover, and which, Brattleboro being Brattleboro is an awful lot of activism. But my concern is bigger than Brattleboro, and that's the fact that our profession is truly under siege in the age of Trump. That 7,200 people have lost their jobs this year in the media across the country. That there's half the number of journalists in the United States than there were 10 years ago. That there are, I whipped these sad statistics out this morning, 2,100 newspapers, weeklies and dailies, are dead. They've died in the last 15 years. The Gannett-Gatehouse merger is going to be taking effect next week. They're going to be controlling 550 newspapers across the country, weeklies and dailies. And they will have a combined circulation of 8 million. What does that mean for democracy when so much information is concentrated in so few hands? 1 in 4 newspapers cut jobs last year, and regrettably, our paper was one of them. And 1 in 7 digital news outlets cut jobs last year. It's awful hard to defend the democracy when there are fewer people on the line to wage the fight. And that's the biggest concern for me and for anyone else who calls themselves journalists. We're outgunned, we're outnumbered, and we're having to do an awful lot with an awful little. And the support that we get from the people who support our newspaper, the Commons, and other media in Brattleboro makes all the difference in the world of what we do.
I'm Tim Johnson from WTSA, and in various incarnations, I've been at both WTSA and WKVT since 1973 when I was a high school senior here in Brattleboro. This community has always had a strong tradition of thinking globally while acting locally. I think back to the early 70s, we at one time had seen several people who had gained national prominence, in the anti-war and even radical movement, settle in Brattleboro and become part of the community, which I think makes us a better community. We've seen things like the nuclear freeze movement start here in Vermont with town meeting, and even going back into the early 2000s, the town meeting resolution here in Brattleboro to arrest President Bush. Brattleboro maintains that kind of activism sense, and we're glad to cover all the local reaction. However, things like radio deregulation have made it tougher for the myriad of radio stations to be able to maintain those same ad dollars as there were when, frankly, there were fewer stations. The internet has also played a role in that people think they can get for free what really is the result of somebody's hard work and is subject to copyright limitations. And our goal is to remind people who are consumers of information, think before you click, think before you share. And really, if you look on things like Facebook, and I'll use this term not lightly, there's a lot of crap out there. A lot of things that really pass themselves off as news, but they aren't. Think about trusted sources, figure out who you trust, and don't just judge one source with what the news is. Look at several of them before you make a decision. These days I'm still doing part-time news for WTSA, but I have to say I'm looking at it from another angle as well, because 4 years ago I was elected town clerk in Vernon, so I'm juggling 2 careers right now, and being able to see it from both sides, I am more so than ever firmly convinced that we've got to really consume our news the same way we conserve our food, with a note of caution and really digging into what it is we're looking at before we decide whether we can eat it.
I'm Peter Case Fish from Great Eastern Radio. The question is basically, have it changed the way we cover our news? I think we live in a unique part of the world where things that happen get reported, and that's the end of it. And most everybody around here accepts it. If there's a car accident downtown, it gets reported as a car accident downtown. There's very little to question that. The incident that happened on Putney Road just a few days ago with clearly somebody high on something shutting down Putney Road, that happened. We saw the video. It got shared. So I don't know how much fake news goes into our publications between the Commons, TSA, VPR, whatever, Brattleboro Reformer, whatever is sitting up at this table today. I think often, a lot of times, people will confuse opinion with news. I know that when I do my weekly column, it often gets accused of being actual journalism, and it's not. It's actually just an opinion column based on fact. And I talked to the kids at the journalism class just the other day about doing, as Tim suggested, like just kind of reading below the headline a little bit more, not just looking for the bold-faced type and accepting it and making up the story that fits your narrative. So that's kind of where we run into a little bit of a problem, is kind of crafting that headline or that lead-in that will tell the story, that will force them to read the rest of the 500 words that are underneath the headline. That's the trick. And when you're pinching that between cat videos on Facebook or Instagram, it can be a little distracting. So I don't feel as though anybody sitting at this table is subject to fake news. I don't think anybody would succumb to it. I think we're all strong people with strong moral ethics, and we wouldn't. There's not a person up here that would fall to that. So I feel fairly confident that it hasn't changed anything that we've done at Great Eastern. And in fact, we've just become a little bit more diligent about reporting more on within our local sphere.
Hi, Melanie Winters with the Brattleboro Reformer. I think a lot of it comes down to perception. We don't feel we've changed. We maintain our professionalism and so forth. But there is a perception out there, thanks to a concerted campaign to demonize the media, that fake news and all that. There is accusations of media bias and so forth. And like Fish said, sometimes people can't differentiate between the news and the opinion page. We try very hard to maintain objectivity on the news page and trying to get all sides of the issue and all possible sources as we can. The opinion page, we're going to give our opinion, and it's different, but we get slammed sometimes for spreading fake news on the opinion page. So, but perhaps it all comes down to, thanks, Fish. It all comes down, I think, to perception, and we know who we have to thank for that. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Bob Brody, a DJ and board member with WVEW, 2 doors down. Hi, Olga. So as such, we're not really a news organization. We don't have a program or agenda around presenting or reporting on news. Having said that, we do have a mix of music, commentary, instead of news, in opinion. And I think what takes place now in the news, real or fake, really does heighten each of our show's content in particular ways. So there's a lot more listenership perhaps to Democracy Now!, which plays every day. A following building for Olga's Montpelier Happy Hour, for anything that might have commentary around what's taking place on a daily basis. From a music perspective, and my show is music, it does kind of have an effect on what I might choose to play. For instance, you would hear the Honey Drippers playing Impeach the President, which they did back in 1973 for that event, and you probably hadn't heard that in the last 50 years. Or 40, whatever. And so you would start hearing content in shows where you might have a format that's all music from people who've recently immigrated to the country. So there's a heightened awareness. There's a lot more people wanting to be on air, to have a chance to participate in the process. But we're free from having to change how we look at the news, because we're really not a news organization. We're a commentary and music organization. Thanks.
I'm going to throw out one more question and then see if anyone from the audience here wants to ask one. Randy was talking about how papers are closing and reporters are going away. And I guess my question was, how do you folks fund your news organizations, given the fact that there's difficult, financial times for everybody? And I'm assuming, Randy, what you're talking about has a lot to do with finances. We'll start with Kevin.
See, I think this is. Yeah.
Really.
But I think this is the big situation for everybody. I don't think it's necessarily what's happening at the national level. I think in terms of the local situation, we have all of these people on this panel, and yet every one of us can tell a story about how things used to be and how we're struggling to make things now. And I think that's the one thing that really concerns me. I understand it's not just media. I think anyone in Windham County is really trying to struggle in terms of finances. But I think if you want a strong media and you want a diverse media, you have to support it. And so I feel that it's great that we're all up here. I feel we're also sharing the same financial concerns. And I feel that the message we need to get out to the public is it's in your best interest to have lots of different sources. So you're not just relying on one. But the only way you have lots of different sources is to financially support them. And I don't think that's a message that people understand. And I think people expect us to be there, but I think it's also the matter of, when I grew up, my grandparents lived in Putney. We went to Baskerville once a year. Well, Baskerville closed. And all of a sudden I go up and I say, you can't close. And they say, well, unfortunately, all of you just show up once a year. And it's sort of the similar thing with the media. I think there are a lot of people who use us, but I don't think Brattleboro understands just how precarious the financial situation is. And if you start losing sources, then you start losing places to offer your voices.
Again, I totally concur with Kevin, Aunt Kate's brother. And so maybe I'll get a question first. The fact is that finances, that's really what's changed. For BCTV in particular, we've really been fat, dumb, and happy for a number of years because we didn't really have to worry that much about finances because we were getting the money from cable operators, et cetera. Well, that's now changing, and we're going to have to change with that in terms of finding ways to keep the station going. It's really a major topic of the board, and Cor and her staff are doing whatever they can do to find ways to cut expenses while maintaining the quality of shows that are going on. And I could tell you that every year the number of shows that are being produced locally by ordinary citizens out there is going up. We're doing over 1,200 hours of programming every year. I mean, that's more than I think it's been compared to Game of Thrones. And that's happening in Brattleboro, and it's happening at BCTV. So I think that really is the biggest threat. Is I think because what Randy said, that people are making assumptions because of the internet and the fact that things appear to be free. They're forgetting that there is in fact a cost to them, and we're going to have to do whatever we can do to make sure that people continue to support all the media, that are sitting at this table, and also ones that you may be using online as well. Because without a free media, things could happen that we'll never know, and the next thing you know, they're going to be having hearings in Washington.
So at VPR, we've been talking a lot about collaboration recently, looking at the finances and trying to figure out ways to, to work smarter with what we have. We work with VT Digger. They send us 4 stories a day, which we pay for. VPR just coming off a relationship with Vermont PBS. We put a bunch of programming together. And, we're trying to kind of accepting what the internet is and realizing, if everyone is scrambling for a story on deadline and breaking news, that maybe it doesn't make sense for us to put our resources into that if other news organizations are going after and taking a breath and reporting on it 2 or 3 or 4 days later and trying to figure out what it is that, public radio can add to the mix. And then, let the folks that are doing that other part of the news do their thing. One thing I wanted to talk about, which I think this is a good opportunity, is that in public radio, we're starting to see, like, now kind of what print media went through 10, 15, 20 years ago. In that a couple of years ago, you had very few options for listening to the radio. You could listen in your car and you could listen at home. And that was pretty much it. And everything that's happening digitally now with laptops and streaming and your phone and your smart speaker is about to turn the whole funding mechanism for public radio on its head, because you can right now tell Alexa to play Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and you can listen to that anytime. And just about everything that public radio offers is going to be available anytime you want it. And so the question becomes, so what does VPR mean for the people of Vermont? VPR now pays National Public Radio a lot of money to get All Things Considered and Morning Edition and all of that programming. But if you can just go to your smart speaker and get it directly, what is the role of VPR? So we're thinking about that. We're thinking about that future. We're thinking about podcasts. And there are a lot of questions about what the future's going to bring, but there is a lot of really big seismic shifts happening in radio right now. And we don't have the answers, but there's going to be a lot of change coming. So we're starting to think about what it's going to look like.
And it's kind of an accident of the seating plan here that all the nonprofit media is on this side, with the exception of VEW, and all the corporate media is on this side. And the secret and the biggest change in news in Vermont over the last decade or so is that VPR and Vermont Digger are become the news leaders as the newspapers have faded. It's hard to believe, but the Commons has a greater circulation than the Burlington Free Press. It has a bigger circulation than, I believe, than the Rutland Herald right now. We put 10,000 copies of our paper on the street every week, and that's a lot more than, say, the Free Press and the Herald does. And that was unthinkable 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the Free Press had 35,000 circulation. The Herald was about 15,000. The Reformer was about 10,000. And those numbers aren't operative anymore, and because of all the options from the internet. But it's easy to get hung up on the mediums, and public radio afraid of Alexa, and afraid of streaming, and newspapers, still the original sin of giving content away on the internet, that they're still trying to stuff back in the bottle, and it's not the medium, it's what you deliver. What do you have that someone's willing to say, hey, I like this and I'm willing to support this? I mean, we're asking people to pay for a free newspaper. And somehow we're managing to have quite a few people in Windham County pay for their free newspaper. VPR in public radio in general, if they're lucky, 5% of their listeners support it. Digger, we're jealous of you guys. We're insanely jealous of you guys because you've managed to raise gobs of money with not breaking much of a sweat because you deliver something that no one else is delivering. You are become the major statewide news source. So if you have something people want, people will support it. And usually that is local news, quality news, news that's fair, news that people can respect the effort that's being put into it in programming. And local will survive long after everything else falls apart and disappears.
I've got one, but thanks.
Okay.
It's an amazing world out there. I mean, I can sit in my easy chair at night, sipping my coffee, and compose a newscast on my iPhone. But that also brings up the question of what are we supporting? When you want local sources of information, you find that they're supported by local dollars. So, on that same note, you can get something online from Amazon or from wherever, but that's not the same as putting a few dollars into the people at Sam's or Brown and Roberts or anybody like that. And the fewer dollars they have, it makes a downshift where they have fewer dollars to put into things like advertising. They have fewer dollars to pay their help. And we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not spending our dollars locally.
When we think about what we put out on a day-to-day basis, I've always, my mantra has always been content, content, content. And content holds them, content keeps them there, content gets them through what in radio we call a stop set to get to the other side for more content that will intrigue them and might be thought-provoking. It's the reason at the last radio station that I worked at that we created programs that specifically were designed to address community things and talk to people in the community. And that went away. Olga knows that firsthand. When we get away from driving content and giving people compelling content, we don't serve ourselves well. So if it's how you program a 3-song set into what the jock says and hold them through that commercial break, if we can hold them through that commercial break and then somebody responds to that commercial, a single commercial, there's that positive thing out there. And to get to Tim's point about trying to keep those dollars local. I mean, when a company like Amazon is taking down malls around the country, these huge buildings, these monuments to capitalism, and just a single website is able to affect business on that level, what chance do we have here locally? Well, it all depends on how we message that and the content that we put out. Howard talked about how VPR is trying to combat that talking beer can that sits on everybody's dresser, and you can just simply say its name and it seems to know who you are and answers all your questions until you start calling it a name, which I've done. It doesn't react well when you do that. But nonetheless, you can ask it for just about anything, and it will give it to you. You can literally talk to Alexa and order stuff on Amazon and apply it right to your card without even while you're making breakfast for your kids. So as convenient as that sounds, every time somebody does that, they're pulling more dollars out of the community. They don't go to Brown and Roberts, as Tim suggests, and buy their hammers when they can just order them while they're making eggs. So I know one of the things that we did to combat that at Great Eastern was something that I've been working on for a long, long time called the Shop Local Initiative, where we just talk to local shop owners, and it's a free thing, a free service that we provide that talks about how, because the local community supports us, we're able to support the local community. And kind of trying to drive and get that point across, and to get them to listen to the radio, to get them to pick up the newspaper, to get them to buy the newspaper. I mean, as Randy pointed out, we sell advertising, and that's how we continue to drive our content and to keep people employed. And as long as we're selling advertising, we're good. The rest of the people at this table have different funding models, and that becomes a little harder to untangle. But anyway, it's all about content, and if we're driving this right content out there, we'll be okay, as long as that content is also informative.
I guess I'm pretty much going to echo what Fish said. There's a lot more competition for people's attention and time and what they choose to read, what they choose to look at and watch. So you kind of have to grab their attention and hold on to it. And that comes with local content. And they can get national news, even state news from another source, but there's only so many places they can get their local news. And that's a service that we provide. And if we're not doing a good enough job marketing that service and showing people its value, then that's something that we need to work on.
Well, for us, I think it's kind of an interesting story right now. We're very much a bare bones organization, usually more bone than anything else. We're all volunteer, member driven. So for what some consider a nominal amount of money, you get trained and you get airtime. And then that becomes kind of a friends and family approach to funding us. We get enough as a 501(c) charitable educational organization to remain on the air. We do work with local Main Street businesses, and there's a lot of competition there for funding. I think sometimes we kind of compete at a social service organization level for not a lot of dollars available, as a charitable organization. Each year we get maybe 1 to 2 donors who have a particular interest in independent radio, and they might fund what might be the equivalent of a month of operating costs. And keeping that operation fluid and ongoing is tough. We don't have any full-time staff, so it's whoever can rise to an occasion, whether it's a broken piece of equipment, a CD player that's not working, mics that need to be replaced. That really requires us to continuously be looking for funding, whether that's, again, at the friends of those who are on the air. Our primary source still remains the fees that we charge each DJ to be on the air. But it's very much a grassroots level. Having the funding, the bare funding to have streaming also allows people who have an interest in Brattleboro and what takes place in Brattleboro, whether that's just at a political level, music, culture, arts. They also provide funding on an episodic nature. And that's the tough thing for us. When we do get support from local donors, it might be for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, and it's a continual effort to keep that kind of grassroots momentum going. But right now, we're probably in a better position than we've been in for several years. And a lot of that is due to the interest of people having time on the air, whether that's to play music, to provide commentary, to engage in conversation about the arts or whatever. So even in the midst of all of the loss of funding, and for us, we because of the nature of who we are, can't do advertising, we provide our underwriters, our commercial underwriters, an opportunity to have a brief spot. Again, we have no ability to collect data to share, who's listening at any one time, and certainly could never correlate that to an impact on a Main Street business. But there are a number of them that want to see us continue and thrive. So interesting, right now we're probably in a better space than we've been in, but it also, the more you develop, the harder it is to keep that money coming in, even at the minimal bare bones level that we have it at.
Is there anybody here in the audience that would like to ask a question? Oh, we have so many people. Martin went first. We'll let Orly go second.
He's your favorite. This is actually not so much a question and more of an observation. I think we should take note how lucky we are actually to have 8 different organizations represented at the table here. There was mention of all of the, just newspapers that have gone out of business in the U.S. I think the number, somebody's keeping count, is like 1,300 so far. Most of those are weeklies. But, the term news deserts has come into being in a lot of those places because if you tried to have a State of the Media forum there, you wouldn't have anybody, because they are in isolated places partly. The Walmarts and Amazons have taken over all of the retail. There's no retail left to advertise, to support media. In many states, the public access TV, is challenged or doesn't even really exist because the kind of funding model that we have here in New England doesn't exist in those states. TV stations are 50 miles away in the Midwest and don't cover the local news, et cetera, et cetera. So, we're really lucky that here, even though we've got a Walmart down the road and so forth, we've got enough local businesses that support, and individuals that support all of these media. And I think that we have enlightened ownership and enlightened boards at the nonprofits that keep it all going. So just congratulations to the community for supporting it, and for all of you to keep it going.
Well, I think we are very fortunate in such a small rural area to have such talented people here. So I think we are very fortunate to have so much support from the community. I mean, we're a very small community. To have 8 different media outlets right here is amazing. My main, and thank you so much, because it's truly a work of love versus being in, you're all very talented and you could be doing other things, and we really appreciate that. My question to you is, we're a very aged community. What are you thinking about in terms of getting younger people more involved in your media outlets?
I guess I can. Are we going in any particular order?
No, because I'm
anymore.
going to get in trouble
No,
if I
I'm
have
not.
Kevin
Yeah,
go
I wasn't going
first.
to do it before he got it again. Again, it just comes. It boils right down to the content that you're putting out there, and what is going to address that person. A lot of radio stations, as Howard pointed out, are even just producing a podcast on the side that might just get people to their website. And understanding that the very day my mom figured out how to set the timer on the VCR, we became an on-demand world. On that day, for that woman to figure that out, to have it be so important to her, lent credibility to the fact that we are moving to this on-demand platform. We no longer watch TV at 8 o'clock at night to watch something. We wait until we can just go on demand and watch it at our convenience. That is the biggest thing that I believe we struggle with. I mean, radio is different. If you're a music format, you pop it on, you listen to the song, you stay because of what's coming out of the speakers, or you leave because of what's coming out of the speakers. It doesn't matter if it's a commercial, if it's something the jock said, if it's a song you like or don't like. That's ours. For newspaper, and you can correct me if I'm incorrect, they won't read the stuff that doesn't interest them. And I believe that's what gives everybody at this table a kind of a unique perspective on how to deliver news and information based on content and keeping it real and something that is hyper local. People still want local news, which is why the Reformer and the Commons exist. That's why Tim and I and Howard have jobs, and online platforms are gaining in credibility because they can pump the content out as fast as social media can. You know, there was the ways that I have literally found out about things that have been happening in my community is somebody posting something on social media and then doing a follow-up to it. So I don't know that we'll ever be as fast as social media, but I think as long as we keep that content out there that's important and relevant, we'll be fine.
One of the issues has been the fact that our industries have become much more technical oriented, in the case of radio anyway. I walked in as a 17-year-old kid in high school spinning 45s on a Sunday night. Now, a lot of stations want you to have a degree, or at least some college or some technical expertise. And I question the ability of a newly graduated college student to be able to pay off their loans when they're working in Brattleboro, Vermont. I mean, I just don't see that happening no matter what industry you're in. We need to do a better job of providing jobs that pay people the kind of wages that would allow them to pay back loans, or even better yet, I don't want to sound political, even though I am, find a way to get through college without the kind of loan debt that we're seeing out there.
Now you're just being unreasonable.
So we have kind of a different dynamic at our station. I probably skew towards the aged outside of the rest of the DJ population. We actually have DJs from around 10 years old up through, well, certainly my age. And we have a group from a high school locally that has a show. So, you know, given the nature that it's all volunteer, there's a relatively low bar for entry. We train people. We do have, we're skewed much more to a younger demographic. Although we do cover everything in between. And one of the things that I think happens is there's really a kind of symbiotic relationship with the local arts and culture. And as that has been growing and thriving in Brattleboro, we've seen a pickup in people wanting to branch into radio, and then they leave or kind of divide their efforts to another cultural, musical, whatever endeavor. And we start to see a lot of kind of connectivity between the music scene, the cultural scene. And again, that may be more of a demographic for the kind of station we have, where it is voluntary, where it's a low bar to entry, and where we provide the training in-house. They're not going to be trained to be professionals. None of us are. We're volunteers. I had a radio show in college, and I loved it and waited 40 years before getting back to it. So I think, you know, there's a lot of willingness at a younger age to be part of what's taking place on radio.
You know, at BCTV, education, reaching out to kids in high school has always been an important role. We have stations at the Brattleboro High School where kids are signing up to learn how to make their own shows. We have a summer camp that was one week, and now there's such a demand. People are asking for a second week. We just gave out an award to a young person who started out in high school and now has gone on to college, doing producing all kinds of shows. It was very exciting to see him bring his fellow students from Landmark College at our Producers Award event. And you know, there was a recent story, as a matter of fact, in the Brattleboro Reformer about one of our folks who got his experience producing shows and working and learning about editing at BCTV, and is now going on to college to pursue that interest that was started at BCTV in Brattleboro. So I think the young folks are looking for these kind of opportunities, and we're seeing them come to BCTV to realize them.
I want to talk about the flip side. We're talking about wanting to be local, and the fact is most young people come to the news through social media. I work for Vermont Digger. We are local, and yet we are increasingly realizing that a lot of our traffic is coming from Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And we're in this position of, to grow as an organization, we need to reach out to more people. But by reaching out to more people through social media, we're not necessarily doing so in a local way. And I think that's the bigger challenge that I think a lot of news organizations are facing. The Reformer has more than 10,000 Facebook followers, which obviously is a huge number. But at the same time, that means a lot of those Facebook followers are taking Reformer content without necessarily paying full price for it. Digger happens to be a nonprofit model, but I think it's a real challenge of young people are on their devices, they are on social media, and yet, again, you need to stay local if you're going to keep the dollars and not sort of turn into something that isn't local. And so I don't know what the answer to that. I just, as someone who is suddenly learning words like analytics and is having people tell me that this is how many people came to your story via Facebook or via Twitter or and the fact that we actually can track that they can tell me that this person in Los Angeles clicked onto your story and read it for 17 minutes and then clicked off and went to the next thing. I mean, that's a lot of information that I fear, who knows what's going to happen to it. So again, I think it's a double-edged sword in terms of young people are on social media, so you need to work with that reality, and at the same time, I think that could create some problems going forward.
And I think there's another point that hasn't been made, which is it possible to be able to cover news if it's just an avocation, if just volunteers are doing it and people who happen to have some time or some interest and ability to show up at select board meetings and cover the meetings or write something for the paper that way? What happens when you just have volunteers and the professionals who actually get money for doing what we do disappear? What happens to the quality of the journalism? What happens to the continuity? Because a volunteer, what's keeping them there? They'll flit onto something else. And it's tough to get young people to do this job because, of course, even in the days when Tim and I started, radio paid starvation wages. And there were 10 people lined up outside the door to take the job for starvation wages. And now they're not even jobs for the people that are for anyone who wanted to get in radio. And there's nobody lined up outside the door. And you look at, and Fish will answer this question too. People under 40, convince them to listen to radio. How?
Content.
I know that's
so it's again, when I broke into radio and Tim of course was there when I got there, we had things called TSL, which stands for time spent listening, and the average time spent listening when I started was around a whopping 22 to 23 minutes before you lost that person. It was probably just because they were at the end of their commute. Now you're literally into single digits with time spent listening, 8, 9 minutes before something grabs their attention. We're very distracted. We have to have laws to tell people not to look at their phones while they're driving. I mean, this is what we're working with. And it's very distracted. That's why everybody has moved to this on-demand platform. And it is hard. And telling somebody the only feedback that I know that we get is if I put something unique on my dial that people respond to. And but the struggle is real. I'm not denying it.
We have time for one more question. We'll give it to Spoon.
I don't have a question. I'm just going to get heavy. If you all don't meet every single week and start talking about why you are saying the things that you're saying, one by one, you will disappear. And each time one of you disappears, who's ever left standing will write an editorial about how sad it was, until eventually there is nobody standing. I think you all know, you wouldn't be there, that without a press in all the forms, we don't have a democracy. It's already getting dim. If the press dies, the lights go out entirely. So what you're doing is absolutely vital. And you can't do it as 8 independent media. And you can't do it until you understand how you got to where you are, how media got to where it is, how it's changed. What is all of this inevitable? Has what we've been doing for a few centuries could not have ended anywhere else but here, with all the problems and the threat of disappearing and the loss of a democracy. And you as media, all of us, I would join you if there was an opportunity. But I walk out of here, and this is largely, it's not a waste of time. It's good to see everybody together, but you're just telling me and everyone the problems you have. I know the problems, but what are the solutions? And the solution, until you identify the disease, you cannot find a cure. And you have to come to grips. You have to understand why people can't differentiate between fake news and real news. Where did that come from? Has it got something to do with how we've educated? Is it something to do with how newspapers and media have perceived their roles? Sort of like a government role. Is the government there to fill potholes, or is it there to peer into the future and get ready for it, to prepare, to be able to get to the future with less suffering than we have now? And so I will end there. I could go on. I have noticed there's a million things that you said, that all of which need further, deeper discussion.
One of the things that you've said, Spoon, which really requires a response, is sense of history, sense of place. For instance, many of the things you speak of go back to George Orwell's book 1984, goes back to the fact that Roy Cohn was the staff attorney for Joseph McCarthy and the Senate Committee on American Activities, and that same Roy Cohn was the man who was Donald Trump's first lawyer. Furthermore, I had the opportunity in the 70s to watch a very young Peter Welch as a public defender in this federal court here in Brattleboro to plead for the case of a man who was convicted of murdering his person he worked for. He was a housekeeper. He was a handyman. The gentleman had killed the former mayor of St. Albans at the time. And this was the same Peter Welch who was very snappy with a comeback and with his questions during the first impeachment hearing that was televised. And just putting it in that kind of historical perspective, we grow some great people in Vermont. We need to grow more. We need to grow several times the number of people at this table.
Can I just maybe end on a somewhat positive note? So as a statewide organization, we have access, our main studios up in Colchester, and we work with some really talented young people up there, interns from UVM. Very smart, very talented, very dedicated to what they're doing. And I am not saying that there are not challenges and they're serious, but when the media organizations historically were built, you needed millions of dollars for a printing press, and the audience were hungry for the news, because if you lived in a small town in New Hampshire or Vermont, your options for getting the news were just very limited. There was a newspaper and the TV station, and that was it. And really, things are changing. And they're changing now amongst the world we're living in, so it's very hard to imagine a future when we're unsure about even where we are today. So I just don't think we need to hold so much on to the way things were. It's just changing and different, and I think we need to accept it and try to, prepare. Randy?
Well, we're lucky in this blessed little spot that at times drives us crazy and at times gives us more news stories than we know what to do with, is that we have an active, engaged, literate community that wants to read about itself, loves to read about itself, argues about what's written about it themselves. I used to joke the Reformer was the paper with 10,000 editors, because the accountability we had as then, and I'm sure Melanie still feels it, if something is screwed up in the paper, you're going to hear about it, whether it's the crossword puzzle or something on the front page. This is a dream place for journalists. And when we talk about the trends and the trends nationally, there's this silent prayer we all say, is thank God we live in Vermont. Because there still is a culture of community. There still is a desire for self-government. There still is a feeling that you can affect change. There still is a feeling of, really? You want us to do that? No. And that is spirit infects everybody, no matter what they do, whether they're a radio station, newspaper, whether they're the major news outlets like Digger and VPR, or whether it's a scrappy little newspaper trying to get the paper out every Wednesday. This is an amazing place to be a journalist. That's why I've been here for so long.
Hang on now.
That's the perfect place to end. Thank you, Randy. And thank you to all the panel. Thank you to everyone who came out here today. Thank you to anyone who's watching it on BCTV. Thank you to BCTV for broadcasting it. And thank you for Strolling of the Heifers for hosting this brown bag.
Thank you, Kate.
You're